Hello, hello. Welcome. Welcome to this session. We are going to talk about the 3 shifts that you need to make to successfully transition from K Award to R1 level funding. And the reason that I want to talk about this is because I work with women faculty every day who are in that sort of in between phase of their K award and thinking about preparing their first R01. And I hear all sorts of questions and all sorts of worries and all sorts of challenges around making that transition from K award level funding to R01 level funding. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. The things that I notice and some of the shifts that I think that you need to make to do that transition successfully. So I've got some notes here that I'm just going to pull up, and we'll get started. But before we get started, in case you're new to me, let me introduce myself. So I'm Sarah Dobson. I'm a research grant consultant and academic career coach. And I work every day with women faculty who, like I said, are in that transition phase from K Award to R01 level funding. And I run a program that supports that transition. And so this is where all of these questions and challenges come up. And so I'm going to talk about those today. So I know that it can be a really mysterious and stressful process, and there are tons of questions about how to do it well. And what I've noticed as well is there's lots of competing advice from mentors and colleagues, and that can make the process feel even more daunting. So before we dive in today, before we start talking about these 3 shifts, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. So very first thing, if, or I guess when you hear something that really resonates with you, that you think is a real gem, a real sort of great piece of advice, type it in the chat for the benefit of the other folks who are watching, whether that's live right now or in the replay. So just type that takeaway in the chat. So that's number 1. Number 2 is if you know somebody who ought to see this video and learn about these 3 shifts, please share it with them. Third thing is if you have any questions, again, whether it's live today or whether you're watching a replay, please feel free to type those comments or questions in the chat, and I can answer them. I can answer them in the chat for you, either while we're live or later on in the comments. Okay, so let's get started. So first thing that I noticed that I want to talk about is that if you have a K award, if you are successfully funded at the K award level, you're already successful, right? So you wrote a grant, it was funded, you're already doing it, you're already successful. And I think it's so easy for folks to lose sight of this, right? Because you're sort of over that already and thinking about the next thing. But I want you to remember that you're in it, you're doing it, you are already successful. And the reason that that's important is because it sets you up for the next stage, right? So one of the things that that I hear a lot, and I'm sure you've heard before, is that, okay, so the K award was about me and the R1 is about the science. And so you can get all tangled up and nervous about that part. But what does that actually mean? So what that means is that your K award was about demonstrating that you have the potential to become a successful independent researcher, right? Which you did. You did successfully demonstrate that because you have been funded at the K level. And just just to back up for a second, we're talking about mentored K awards, right? So you have successfully demonstrated that you have the potential to become an independent researcher, and the NIH agrees with you. They funded you, so that part is done. You've done that. You're successful. What your R1 is really about is is sort of demonstrating that you can live up to that potential, right? So by getting a massive multi-year, multi-million dollar research project application funded as a PI, right? And obviously that can feel like a completely different ball game. I've heard people talk about it as going from JV basketball straight to the NBA. And it is a different scenario, a different kettle of fish for sure. But what I want you to recognize is that you have already had success here. And now it's time to continue with that level of success and really demonstrate that you can live up to that potential that you've already established, right? So the first big shift that you need to make is really trusting that you actually have what it takes, right? Really trusting that you've crossed that first hurdle and you have everything you need to get to that next level. And that part is really about changing your mindset about it, right? Instead of looking at it as this big, scary, challenging thing, that it's just a matter of taking what you already have and building upon it, right? And if you're anything like the women I coach, you've probably been waiting for someone to tell you that you're ready, that you can do it, that you actually do have what it takes, right? But the most important thing is for you to tell yourself that. So don't get caught up in imposter syndrome before you even start. Trust that you can do it and trust that you have what it takes. And of course, it is a process, right? This is why if you're sort of midway through your K award, you're already thinking about preparing your first R01 because you know that it might take a couple of attempts. All of that, yes, is a realistic perspective to have on making the transition, right? It is a process, but first and foremost, you need to believe that you can do it. Okay. So again, this shift is really about your mindset. It's about moving away from thinking of yourself as a mentee and a trainee and looking to other people for knowledge and for answers and really trusting in your own expertise and your own experience. It's about really stepping into a leadership role and recognizing that you are a PI and that you have what it takes to be a PI, right? So that's that first shift, is really that mindset shift that you need to make. So the second thing I notice with this sort of group of people who are transitioning from their career development awards to R01 level funding is that if you want to have a successful, prolific research career, you can't do everything that you want to do and everything that other people want you to do. There's no way as a professional, as a researcher, to avoid disappointing people. But the worst person to disappoint is yourself. And so this observation has come from talking to a lot of women who are in this transitional stage of moving from a K award to R01 level funding, who are scattered in a million different directions, trying to please everybody, sitting on a bunch of different committees, joining a bunch of different projects, and not really leaving enough time for their own work and their own priorities. And so the shift that you really need to make here is around your priorities. And so I'm going to bet if you're anything like the women I coach, you got to where you are today by being a good student, right? Checking all the boxes, saying yes to every request, just being that team player and sort of going above and beyond, and putting your own work to the side to be able to take on requests that come your way, right? That has really served you up to this point. But I'm also going to bet that you feel run down and overwhelmed and pulled in a million different directions. And that's because you've said yes to everything and you've ended up on a dozen different committees, and you might have even committed to being co-I on a couple of different projects at a low percent effort, because you were anticipating that you might not be able to to fund your own work at the level that you want it to be funded. And so you're sort of spreading yourself out and hedging your bets a little bit, so that you're sort of covering those bases, right? And it ends up that you're doing your research and the work that you care about on nights and weekends and sort of in the margins, right? But look, if you want to do the research that you really care about and make the kind of impact that you want to make with your research, you're going to need to establish some clear priorities. You're going to have to disappoint some people, okay? And the clearer you are about what you're here to accomplish and the kind of impact that you want to make with your research, the easier it will be for you to make those decisions and to figure out what is worth your time and effort and what isn't aligned with your time and effort right now, okay? And so the other piece of this is that we say yes to things a lot of time out of fear, right? So we're afraid that we'll disappoint someone, or we're afraid of what will happen if we say no. So we say yes, or we say yes to being on a project, even though it's not really what we're interested in doing, because we're afraid that we're not going to be able to support our own research at the level that we want to. And so what that does, saying yes to things out of fear, means that it's not leaving enough time to actually do the work that you want to do. And so you end up sort of building a career based on fear that is really unfulfilling, right? And that just means that you're going to end up in a situation where you are pursuing a career that's not allowing you to do the work that you really want to do, that's not allowing you to meet your full potential, and that's not fulfilling for you, right? So I just want you to keep in mind that it's really important. One of the really important shifts that you need to make is around prioritizing what matters to you, right? And as part of that, you need to recognize that writing is a huge part of the work that you need to be doing as a researcher, right? And again, this ties into the conversation about priorities, because what happens often, and what I observe a lot, is that writing grants and papers gets pushed to the side, right? It gets deprioritized compared to other seemingly urgent activities, and other either quick wins or fires that need to be put out, right? And so the writing work that actually leads to, career currency, grants and publications, gets done off the side of your desk, or put to the sidelines, right? But what you need to recognize as you're prioritizing the components of your career that really matter to you is that writing is actually front and center in that, right? That really, as a researcher, if you want to be a successful and prolific researcher, you need to think of yourself as a professional writer. That is a core identity that you need to have if you're going to pursue a successful research career, right? And it can be hard to kind of wrap your mind around that, because it's not emphasized, let's say, in the day-to-day activities of your career. It's something that you're just expected to figure out on your own and deal with on your own. And it's really, the research that does get sort of prioritized and emphasized. However, the actual communication of that research is vitally important to your career success. And so making sure that you're treating that accordingly and prioritizing that accordingly is really, really, really important. So that's that second shift that you need to make around establishing clear priorities. Number 3, so the third thing that I notice, one of the worries that I hear most often from K Award recipients is about whether their ideas are R01 caliber, whether they're R1 level ideas, right? I hear this all the time. And so the shift that you need to make here is about trusting your own expertise and capability. And so one of the mistakes that I see most often on the grant consulting side of the work that I do is that with folks who are submitting their first R01, the mistake that they make most often, or the biggest mistake that I see, is they treat their grant as a way to sort of show that they've done the reading, right? So to demonstrate that they understand the science behind what it is that they're proposing. But that's not what a grant application is for. That's not the objective of a grant application. The objective of a grant application is to persuade your audience to recommend your project for funding. And so if you're providing a lot of context and detail and background information about the scientific premise of what you're proposing, that is distracting from the argument that you ought to be making about why your research deserves to be funded, why you're the team to do it, and why your project is feasible. There just isn't enough room there to really provide that focused argument that you need to make to get yourself funded. And so those proposals don't usually end up going anywhere because they aren't focused in their argument around those key parts, right? So showing that you've done the reading oftentimes in my observation comes from a mistrust of yourself, that you don't that you're not really sure that you understand the scientific premise of what you're doing, and so you're trying to convince yourself and your audience that you actually do know what you're talking about. But the shift that you need to make here is to just trust that you do know, and that you can sort of move away from making that type of argument into the more specific argument that you need to make in an R01 application around, the big scientific challenge that you are working on and the specific gap in knowledge that you're trying to fill in this particular application. And I will say that, some of this can be overcome with grantsmanship training, really understanding what is required to write a strong R01. Yes, absolutely. I do a lot of that, but behind that is really just the belief in yourself that you actually do know what you're doing. You do have enough expertise to really, operate at this level and to tackle R01 caliber ideas. It's really about sort of believing in that first. And then the sort of mechanics of how to put it all together that's the easy part, right? But really believing that that you do have that expertise and experience, and that you do have R01 caliber ideas, that comes first. And there are other parts to that, certainly around getting feedback from colleagues and mentors, and really testing out those ideas and refining them. But just sort of stepping back and looking at things from a bigger picture perspective and saying, what are the big scientific challenges that I want to be working on, and what am I really here to do? Once you have that piece figured out, you'll have an infinite number of R01 caliber ideas to work on. Truly, it's just about trusting that you're really onto something, and that you do have something valuable to contribute, and then figuring out where you want to put that focus, right? And then the scope of your ideas can absolutely fit the R01 mechanism, the R01 container. But first and foremost, it's really about just trusting and believing that you can work at that level. Okay. So to recap, the 3 shifts that you need to make to successfully transition from a career development award to R01 level funding. The first shift is about mindset. You really need to shift your mindset from being a mentee to being a leader, to being a principal investigator, right? The second shift that you need to make is around your priorities. So it's really about shifting from kind of checking all the boxes and being a really good student and saying yes to everything and everyone, and shifting into, being deliberate about your career and designing it and prioritizing and protecting the elements that you want to be focused on. The third shift is about shifting your grant writing. So shifting from showing that you've done the reading to really making a strong argument. And part of that is about shifting from thinking about your work in terms of a small scale project that's going to help you achieve a career goal, which is what you were doing in your career development award, to really thinking about solving or working on a large scale scientific challenge that has discrete gaps in knowledge that you're trying to fill. That's the difference. That's the shift that you need to make there. So there you have it. So the action that I want you to take today, based on these three shifts, the first thing that I want you to do is a little confidence builder exercise. Okay. So I want you to take a moment to write down what makes you excellent at what you do. And of course, if you feel comfortable sharing that in the chat, I invite you to write that in the comments and let me know. But if you just keep that to yourself, that is totally fine. So I'm going to check in here and see if there are any questions. None so far, but if you do have any questions, please just put them in the chat. And the last thing I will say is that if you found this video helpful and you're looking for some support as you transition from your Career Development Award to your first R1, I run a K to R transition program for women faculty that can help you make that leap successfully. So if you're interested in learning more about the program, I invite you to book a call with me. So you'll see in the video description, there's a link that will send you to an application page where you can book a call with me and we can talk about your specific situation. Our next cohort starts in April, so please don't hesitate if you are interested in joining us. So it doesn't look like there are any questions, so I will leave it at that today, and I will see you next time.